So the iPhone 13 Pro looks a lot like the iPhone 12 Pro, but while the differences are subtle, they're definitely very significant. And since this phone came out, it's been creating a lot of excitement. And I can assume by now, you've probably seen a video or an article somewhere talking about some of the key specs of this phone. So in this video, I'm not going to talk about the specs, but rather what the implications are of these changes they made. Because you might have heard they improved the battery, they improved the camera, they improved the screen, but with each of those, there was kind of a ripple around them of different subtle changes that happened. I'll talk about the differences in the notch and why I'm not actually as happy about it as you might think, as well as the same thing with the camera bump. There's a lot of great things with this phone, and some other things that are little nuances you want to be aware of. So after using this phone every day for the past week, I want to talk about what those differences, what those nuances really are with this phone. So with that being said, let's jump into it. I want to start off by talking about each difference individually compared to the iPhone 12 last year. So the first difference I want to talk about is with the camera system. Cameras have always been really important in phones, and so in order to make last year's model better, this year they had to make the cameras bigger. They got bigger sensors, bigger pixels, and everything that you might need to get better low light photos and less blur in any low light really. And while I really appreciate the cameras on here, and I'll talk more about that later in the video, the actual physical camera lenses themselves take up a little bit more space, which doesn't really seem to be a problem. Phones already have massive camera bumps. Look at the S21 Ultra or the Mi 11 Ultra. They're absolutely massive. And with that being said, having this being slightly larger doesn't seem to be a problem at first, but it does create some hiccups. So the first one that I noticed, and actually other people have noticed this as well, is when it comes to wireless charging, whether that's from MagSafe or from any wireless charger, setting this down on a flat surface, you tend to have a gap there. And unless the wireless charger is small enough to just fit right in the middle there, you're going to have some airspace. And when you have airspace between the wireless charger and this device, it is less efficient. So if I set this on a wireless charging stand, like I have all around my house, it tends to charge very, very slow. And on top of that, it can be a little bit finicky if you set it on a wireless charging pad. Again, because the camera bump's so big, it wants to slide forward and off. Now you might say, we can fix that with MagSafe, right? And with many MagSafe accessories, sure, you can fix that. But with things like the MagSafe Duo charger, you'll notice that the camera bump is a little bit larger than last year, and this can get in the way. This can interfere with it, and unless you line it up perfectly, it's a little bit more finicky. It's a little bit harder to get on there. So while I love the cameras, great improvement, super exciting, I think that this is more than ever an important time to have MagSafe with this device. And so one of the improvements I was really hoping to see on the iPhone 13 lineup that we didn't actually get to see was the improved strength of MagSafe magnets. I was really hoping that this would be stronger because this device is a relatively heavy phone, and so if you have it on some type of third-party MagSafe accessory, maybe like a Belkin charger on your phone or on your car, anytime you make a turn, it is probably going to slide off. It's a little bit of a drawback there, but I think the trade-off for charging versus the better cameras is probably worth it. I think eventually we're going to really easily adapt, and there's going to be plenty of chargers that will fit perfectly with the current infrastructure of that camera on the back. So ultimately, I think this is still a positive. I love how the cameras do a fantastic job in low light. Honestly, might as well just talk about the cameras right now. This is one of the biggest highlights of this phone, where a lot of critics last year, anybody who didn't like the iPhone cameras, I mean, they're fantastic cameras, but the complaints people might have had would be that a lot of the photos look similar. And that's true with any phone, really. They all have their own style, but the iPhone style is very recognizable. The photos are very warm, they're very flat, and some people want to have a little more control over that. So again, Apple listened, and with their software, you now have different styles you can choose with photos. So you can choose the standard one, which looks like most iPhone photos. You can go to a more rich contrast one, which looks a little bit more like the Pixel photos, or you can go to something that's a little more saturated to look more like the Samsung photos. And so with that ability to change that, and these are not filters, it's actually done in the processing. It's a different way that it processes the photos. And with those changes, both with the styles you can choose and with the low light capabilities of these lenses, it's going to be very difficult for any phones to compete with these still photos from this camera. And of course, I'll have some sample shots on my Twitter. I'll link that like right below in the description. You guys can head over and check out those photos. But of course, here's a couple example photos here. I think it looks fantastic. And so while in the past, it has been really a matter of preference for which camera you thought took the best still photos, the iPhone has generally taken better videos than a lot of the competition for a while. And so this year, having those larger sensors, of course, is going to make it even more capable of taking videos in lower light. All right, this is the iPhone 13 Pro. just a video test. Let's take a look at these tomatoes. You can see there's a really nice natural blur. This is not using cinema mode, but if I tap on that tomato back there, see if you can focus. Yeah, focus is back there. We can focus back on these. Does a pretty good job. Obviously it's golden hour, so the color looks pretty fantastic. But something Apple added this year, which is kind of similar-ish to what we saw on Galaxy phones recently, is called cinematic mode. And so we had like portrait video before on Galaxy phones, but now with this, you have a little bit more functionality with how you can control it, what you're focusing on, when you're focusing on different things, and how much blur you have, which is a fun thing to have. And I think right now, it's still very early on though. So it's gonna be fun to play with. You can make fun little videos, maybe for TikTok and things like that, but you're probably not going to use this, or really, I'll say it like this. I don't think on the Pro model phone, cinematic mode is the right word because, first of all, it's limited to 1080p, which is not very pro, and second of all, it's limited to 30 frames per second, which is not very cinematic, which I don't want to get into 24 versus 30 frames per second, doesn't matter, but the point is, it's cool to have, and it's still very early on, so I'm excited to see what Apple eventually does with that. And continuing with the front of the phone, we now have a 120 hertz refresh rate, which again, was one of the big complaints last year from the iPhone 12 Pro, was that every other Android phone had a 120 hertz refresh rate, so finally getting that on the 13 Pro, I think is a big upgrade. Is it worth moving from an iPhone 12 Pro to the 13 Pro? Probably not, because it is subtle. Once you get used to 60 hertz, it's not a big deal. It is much better that everything's at 120 hertz. It's much easier to look at. You can read while you're scrolling, and it's just really nice to have a fluid, fast display like that. So I was very happy to see that Apple did that. That's a huge positive right there. The next big change we saw from the iPhone 12 to the 13 was the reduction of the notch on the top. And while this is great because you're getting more screen real estate, of course, it also comes with some really subtle other changes you want to be aware of. So first of all, the positives. I like that you have more screen real estate. Of course, that's nice. Apple didn't really do a whole lot with that. You're able to see like your battery level and your Wi-Fi a little bit easier now, but otherwise, they didn't really add anything up there, so it's not super different. Really, it's just gonna be different with how you look at it, and I think kind of a common theme throughout the iPhone 13 versus last year's 12 is that Apple's been making subtle changes to really go after what people complained about with the 12. And one of them was that the notch was just so intrusive. And so rather than abandoning Apple's much-loved Face ID, which is a great way to sign into apps and into your phone, they somehow managed to rearrange everything and drastically reduce the size of the notch. And so with the notch, I mentioned before that there were kind of subtle ripples around all their changes. The ones here are kind of not really that significant, to be honest, but I want to mention them anyway. One of them is that the camera, the selfie camera, which honestly hasn't really changed much, but it was just moved from the right side over to the left side of the notch. And the second thing is instead of having the earpiece or the speaker down in the middle of the notch, which is a little bit annoying to look at, instead they moved it all the way up to the very edge, which I think was a good spot for that. Something that is strange, however, is that it does have a pretty glossy metal ring around there, so if it catches the light correctly, it's very, very noticeable that the speaker is, very well outlined in metal. And although last year's iPhone 12 Pro was already pretty decent with battery, another change that they made was to improve the battery life on the 13. Across the entire spectrum from the 13 mini up to the 13 Pro Max, having a longer battery life is kind of rooted in several different things. One of them is having the new A15 bionic, which can be very efficient and yet very powerful, but really a big one is just having a larger battery. Now, as I mentioned before when I was talking about MagSafe, this is a heavy phone, and I think that kind of goes well with the glass back and the gold shiny exterior. It makes it feel more premium. I'm glad that it's heavy, but I'm getting off topic. The battery life on here is fantastic. This is an absolute battery champ. Despite being such a powerful device, I can take 4K videos all day, use it a lot, watch YouTube videos, do anything I want on here, and even with like 4 or 5 hours screen time, I'm very comfortably ending my day with like 20 or 30% battery left. So fantastic with the battery. Of course, you're going to be charging it overnight anyway, is what I usually do. So, you have no problem getting through an entire day, no matter how much of a power user you really are. And so those are the 4 main upgrades Apple made for the iPhone 13 Pro. The battery, the display, the cameras, and the notch on the top. And while all those sound like small, unexciting iterative updates, they are very essential, and I think they're very significant into giving you a better experience with this versus last year's iPhone 12 Pro. And on top of that, I think they were very necessary to keep this in the conversation as one of the best phones of the year. Now, with that being said, is it worth the upgrade from last year's iPhone 12 Pro? I would say probably not. While they are subtle upgrades, last year's 12 Pro was still a pretty decent device, and trading it in to buy this, I don't know if it's different enough to really justify the upgrade. But for anybody else, if you had a mini last year or if you had an older iPhone 11, upgrading to this is going to feel fantastic. And I think that it's still going to be worth it. But with that being said, there were some things that didn't change that I wanted to see changed. Like I mentioned, MagSafe was one of them. On top of that, while I really do like the overall device, still having a Lightning port on the bottom on a Pro model phone just kind of feels wrong. I know that we have the Lightning cable that comes in the box, but still, plugging into peripheral accessories or really using this phone to its fullest feels like you would want a USB Type-C port on there. So who knows? Maybe that's something that Apple will do next year, or maybe they'll just get rid of the port altogether. But regardless, the iPhone 13 Pro is probably going to be my everyday phone for at least for the next little while. But you can leave a comment below. Do you think that Apple did enough for this to justify an iPhone 13? Or would you argue that this is an iPhone 12s? I guess it doesn't really matter what it's called, but what do you think of it? Leave a comment below, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. But before we end this video, I want to talk about what does, or really what doesn't come in the box. So much like last year's 12, the iPhone 13 comes with a charging cable, but no charging brick. So I mentioned that with the massive camera bump on here, not all wireless charging pads work. So if you want to do any wired charging, and you want this to charge at any reasonable speed, you're going to have to get a charging brick. So if Apple's not going to hook you up, our friends over at Anchor certainly are. So special thanks to Anchor for sending this over and for sponsoring this video. This is the Anker Nano Pro, which is the latest 20-watt fast charger in a compact body designed for the iPhone. This charges the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro to 50% in just 25 minutes, which is up to 3 times faster than the old little 5-watt white charging bricks that Apple used to ship with. And you might have heard about last year's popular Anker Nano, and the Nano Pro this year has been upgraded with a temperature sensor and intelligent software, which means while charging, the process is safer and protects your iPhone at the same time. I also love how Anker designed this to really match the aesthetic of the iPhone, from the glass exterior, which really matches the iPhone Pro well, to the aluminum finish on the outside. I feel like all the different colors that are available with this just look really nice and can match your phone very well. I personally love these, and I have them in my backpack, next to my bed, in my office, and the best thing is they do more than just charge your iPhone. You can plug in wireless chargers, earbuds, all types of different devices to these, and they charge very quickly. So special thanks to Anker for sending this over. I'll leave a link in the top of the description if you guys are looking for a fast charger that does a fantastic job and looks really cool. Go on down and check out that link. As always, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, consider liking and subscribing. I'm Mike O'Brien. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.